afternoon. I'm Beth Copeland with Georgia Christian Business Network, and we are putting God back in business. I'm excited always to be a part of this amazing team of awesome professionals that God has chosen to be a part of this platform. It's a unique opportunity. I was telling someone about it last week. It's really a great opportunity for you to be strengthened in your business. Yep, that's what I said, to be strengthened in your business. It's a great opportunity for you to be able to be the best version of who God created you to be. And I said all that, and I still say it's Wellness Wednesday. Yes, Take Charge Tuesday has its role, has its place. We had an amazing presenter, and she's on the Zoom call with us this morning, Larissa Jean. And she presented some awesome, powerful business acumen on yesterday. If you missed it, no worries, go get the replay. Yet, we love to come behind on our Wellness Wednesday platform. In a moment, you'll have an opportunity to hear from these ladies in their credentials. We promoted them on paper, but you'll hear from the heart who they are, what they do, and why it's important for you to know. Because what you'll understand and comprehend that God has assigned these people for such a time as this to propel you forward in business and life, mentally, emotionally, listen, physically even we have opportunities. But what we're talking about is getting your spiritual man in order so that you can do well, be successful in business. So I wanted to take that moment to tell you the urgency and the importance of being a regular participant, tuning in, engaging in our Wellness Wednesday platform. And then I want to just say quickly to the ladies, thank you for your sacrifices of allowing God to use you on this platform, that you're giving, you're sacrificing your time to study, to prepare, to show up here for an hour that you could be billable. So thank you for that, because it's important for God's people. And GCBN, we recognize it and we value you. So thank you. It's the year of higher ground. Let's go higher together. Go forward, Pamela.
Let's go higher together. Absolutely. My name is Pamela Bridgeman, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I also hold credentials as a certified master addictions counselor and a certified clinical trauma professional. I'm an Air Force veteran and an ordained minister. I own a healing journey counseling and consultation here in Northwest Georgia, where I provide trauma-informed care for individuals with mental health and substance use challenges, as well as family therapy. I have been providing compassionate care since 1976. Christine.
I'm Christine Oswald. I am the owner of Real Conversations, Christian Life Coaching and Consulting, through which I work with worn out, weary, and exhausted women as they're trying to reconnect to their person, their passion, and their purpose. I provide trauma-informed life coaching and pastoral counseling. I'm an ordained minister. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, with specializations in Christian spirituality and formation, and in Christian sex therapy and trauma recovery.
Jessica?
I'm Jessica Banner. I have a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. Spent 10 years working in mental health with psychiatric and substance abuse, predominantly with adolescents and adults, and then transferred for the last 6 years, been doing trauma resolution counseling from a pastoral counseling perspective, and currently writing a book and working on developing a training program so that we can help others build trauma-informed pastoral care departments.
And Larissa and Denise, thank you so much for joining us today. And although we will be we'll facilitate through our discussion as we normally do, you are welcome to let us know when you want to chime in. And particularly, Larissa, I know what you do, and there may be times that I'll actually specifically call on you, okay?
That sounds great. Thank you for having us.
So we have been talking about trauma this month. We looked at emotional and spiritual trauma, and physical and sexual trauma. We used one particular case study, and even though that particular case study, which was the daughter of King David, Tamar, who was violated by her brother Amnon, even though it was about a particular kind of trauma, we know that it had the same patterns as other kinds of cycles of trauma. So we were able to pull some insight just from looking at that case study. And looking at trauma, particularly what we've been talking about this month, it could be pretty distressing. So we don't want to leave you there. We are not going to leave. The title of our presentation this month is From Trauma to Triumph. And so today we're talking about the triumph. Jessica, do you read the two scriptures that we're gonna kind of use as our underpinning for today?
Sure. The first one comes from Isaiah 40:29. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. The second one is from Psalm 127, verse 3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds.
And he does it through us. We are his hands extended. Christine, I was wondering if you could just kind of give us a little bit, if you want to read directly from that introduction, you can, but if you would just kind of go through that introduction, either summarize it or read it directly.
Sure. So there are two kind of categories of trauma. They used to be called type A and type B, but one is the proactive invasive. So whether it is emotional, spiritual, sexual, psychological, physical, that is an unwanted act done to and toward. Then there's also the type B, or the abandonment trauma, when something that should have happened didn't happen. And a lot of times in the world, when they talk about trauma, they're talking about something that happened. We think a lot of times even the criteria for PTSD, it's experiencing or witnessing a traumatic, violent act. But there's also the trauma of neglect. So something that should have happened that didn't happen. Security in home, in food, nurture, emotional neglect, those kinds of things. And they're both really valid, and they both have long-lasting impact. A lot of times the type B trauma often is a little bit more subtle because it is so environmental and climate and contextual, and because it often has a very complex, so CPTSD sort of thing, an ongoing, repetitive, over a long period of time kind of thing as well. So both are very valid.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, Jessica and Christine, as pastoral counselors, are there ways in which spiritual abuse can also fall into the abandonment category? I'm thinking about some subtle things, but thinking about the pastoral counseling you guys have done, are there ways that even spiritual can fall into that abandonment?
I think absolutely, one of the things that makes me think about is there's a lot of people who come to the church because they've been given the hope of, um, if my earthly father can't do it, I can find that in the church, and so there can often be sets of expectations about the care and the consideration, and I know that's not directly spiritual abuse, but it falls under that umbrella of
That
how it could
category.
get defined, because that could feel like an abuse to that person, abuse from the space of
Right.
neglect and abandonment. And so I think I feel like I hear those kinds of statements a lot. Like, I expected this person to care for me in this way, or take care of me in that way, or that they should have partnered with me in this. And it creates confusion about truth, and the representation of that sometimes. And it's a two-sided thing, because sometimes that comes from what that person is expecting and
That
believing. And
expectation, yeah.
right. And that has often come from former trauma in that person's life of some capacity, and where that got developed. But to me, that's one way that can happen.
Christine, from a pastoral perspective.
It was interesting, Pamela, because as I was reading through your notes again this morning, I thought about that. In terms of physical neglect, it's pretty clear, right? There's the insecure housing and children who aren't getting fed and don't have this food security. But I thought about that because, I'm always talking about how our sexuality and our spirituality are just so central to us, and you can't kind of separate them out. But there's so many commands about, parents training up your child in the way they should go, right? Putting reminders on our doorposts, because it almost has to be told to us to remember to pass this on to them, because the neglect that we do opens up such a space for the world to come in, for the gods of the age to step in, for understanding of self to be filled in by something else. I think that's a lot of, unfortunately, what we've done in the church, is that when the spiritual education of our kids got delegated to the church, when we kind of went to this whole industrial model as a culture, unless the family is training their children to have a Christian worldview, to have discernment of the worldviews they're being taught, the coolest, hippest, most amazing prof they meet when they go to their college is going to become the coolest, hippest worldview. And so it's interesting, but we often don't talk about spiritual or sexual neglect. But when we don't tell our children the beauty of godly sexuality within the boundaries that God's established, we set them up for the world to tell them what to do with that. When we don't tell our kids, let's look at what it is to have a grace and truth kind of faith, then we're just waiting for someone else to come in to give them a faith in something else that's going to lead to destruction. So it was interesting that you brought that up, because I'm like, yeah, we don't talk about that kind of neglect very much, do we? But it's huge.
I see you nodding, Larissa. What are your thoughts?
I think that's so powerful, to Christine's point about the spiritual neglect. With my background in education over these last, 17 something years, I always help parents to realize, especially parents in the family of God, you are your child's first teacher. You are their first pastor. You are shepherding their heart to their own relationship with the Lord. And I think in today's time, there is such an identity crisis with our youth because of that spiritual neglect. And to Christine's point earlier as well, kind of pushing the responsibility on, okay, the Sunday school teacher will do it, or
Right.
the youth pastor will do it, or children's church will do it, or the private school will do it. Those are a supplement. That is an additional layer of support. That's just partnering with the foundational work that, parents are to do. So I think it's so key, even when we're talking about who God has called our young people to be, they need to have that foundation. And when it's neglected, we are setting them up for failure. And we see that just kind of manifest in the choices that they make, how they see themselves, and even, their performance in, an academic setting.
Mm.
It's always a litmus test. I always tell people, if you want to know what's happening in a community, you want to know the health and strength of a community, sit in a classroom
Right.
and you will
Yes.
see the health of a community.
I used to teach, and I agree with. I agree.
I'd like to come in behind that directly and share that this is such a wonderful discussion, and really tracking with what all of you said, and especially following Larissa's comments. As a parent, I'd like to say that we own, when we become parents, it's a matter of you're looking for an opportunity to be qualified as a parent. Nobody can qualify you but God. But you own the responsibility of parenting that child. That child did not ask to be here. That's the
Right.
first and foremost thing that we need to recognize. And I often hear people talk about, that's a bad kid, that's a bad kid. I don't believe it. I believe there's an opportunity if you want to label somebody bad, and I think you have to be careful with labeling bad, even
Right.
to the parent.
Yes.
Okay. Because sometimes, and often I've noticed it and I've seen it, they did the best they knew. It's cyclical behavior that's repeating itself. They did what they understood and what they saw done as a parent. And so it was very important to me and Jerome Sr. to see our children receive a Christian education, but that didn't exempt
The
our
parent from doing
as
what
being
they
the
needed to do.
primary responsibility for teaching them the word. Because as Christine's point, we have to, it's unfortunate, but we have to be reminded that that is our role as a parent. If we wonder how we got where we are today, when I saw a 9-year-old, and I just can't do it. You guys do it if you need to, but I cannot watch the news on a regular basis because it's disheartening, and you can judge me and say, oh, you have a little faith or whatever, but some things I just don't need in my spirit. And this 9-year-older in a car with, guess what, the other ages, there wasn't one over 15. And now they are going to be held. They did some shooting and stuff, and murder was involved. The thing that I'm saying back, let me have this one for a minute, that because I'm passionate about it. And I believe it's urgent. The thing that I want to say to parents, the only opportunity that we have for learning and living and rearing our children is found right here in the Word of God. And otherwise, anything, I mean, we got counselors that are, this platform here are filled with people to help us. Don't feel as if you do not have an outlet. Don't feel if there's an opportunity, don't allow anyone, and don't you label yourself as a bad parent. What is an opportunity is that you can be a better parent if you will seek the help that you need, because no one arrives knowing, and everything that mommy and daddy did or mom and dad did isn't the right thing, isn't the right way if it doesn't align with here. So I just want to
one of
put
the
that out
so
there.
one of the ways that we get, so we're talking about to triumph. So we've spent almost 30 minutes talking about one of the, or I would say the most important way of getting to the triumph is what a parent needs to do, the foundation that needs to come from parents. And so I'm going to give the list of those things that that we need to do for what trauma survivors need, and then we'll go back and discuss what the trauma survivor needs. Okay, so I was going to do them one at a time, but so that since we only have about 30 minutes left, I'm going to give the full list so we know the full list, and then we'll discuss as much as we can. So the trauma survivor needs to be educated about the nature of trauma, which is one of the things that we've been doing this month, needs comforting, needs help in expressing their anger about their trauma. This includes their anger at the perpetrator, but it may not necessarily mean that they confront the perpetrator. They need instruction in the process of grieving the losses the trauma has caused in their lives. A lot of people don't know how to grieve. They don't even know how to grieve death, much less how to grieve trauma. They need to know that they did, this is important, they need to know that they didn't deserve their hurts and they didn't cause them. No matter what they did, they didn't deserve it, they didn't cause it. They need help in structuring boundaries so that they will not be harmed again, current or new relationships. They need to see the positive strengths. Oh, this is so important. And I hope one of you or several of you will really talk about this one. They need to see the positive strengths that can result from the healing of their trauma. And then they need to be able to eventually, and please hear the word eventually, forgive. So let's start with what kind of psychoeducation or medical education does survivors need? What kind of education do they need?
I know for myself, and I love that you put the body keeps the score in your question, because it was an excellent book the way it's written. Because one of the things I find I do a ton of education is actually educating people about the neurological, biological process of trauma, because so often it gets put off on just think different or be different. And when people feel like, but it's out of my control, there's something going on in this that feels beyond me, it really helps them to understand the neurogenesis and the neurological operation of what's happening in trauma, to go, oh, well, it got wired in there. That's why I'm having a hard time just kicking it out, you know? So definitely understanding the physicality and the neurology behind biology, I find is really helpful.
Right. Why do I feel nauseated when I walk into certain spaces? Why do certain smells cause me to feel fearful? What else might they need to be educated?
Yeah, definitely. Honoring the body and understanding the amygdala, what happened to the brain and what happens. I think there's that part. I think there's the part also about that mindfulness piece of noticing in terms of like, what is a flashback? What does it look like when one's coming, when I'm in it? What's the recovery process? I think understanding the cycles and the processes of trauma, both the triggers, the in it, the other side, how to recover. The polyvagal theory is really starting to take off in terms of like, fight, flight, freeze, and being in our best spot. How do we know how to allow trauma to kind of work back through our nervous system, to go from freeze back through fight, and flight, and then to kind of get back to a position where we are in a rational place where our prefrontal cortex is getting the blood flow that it needs to make choices and decisions. So I think the education piece, because when it happens, we just, clients come in and when they're like, I don't know what's happening, or I'm remembering things that I forgotten, or I saw this family member I hadn't seen in 20 years, and all of a sudden, it is just overwhelming. So it really does help to understand that there are predictable patterns to this. And because of that, it doesn't have to be this like terrifying monster waiting to pounce. It is that way for a while. But as we start to notice and we start to go, okay, not only are these the normal things for trauma, but these are my normal things for trauma. For some people, it's going to be
so
here.
important.
It's going to be here. For some people, it's going to be I've been trapped on my phone for 3 hours watching YouTube videos and my body's frozen, and noticing and going, okay, this is what I do. And then what can I do to break it out, and to start taking those pieces of personal power back.
Some people are more prone to, for instance, depersonalization and dissociation, and they don't recognize what is this feeling of unrealness I'm having, or what is this feelness of being outside of my body. So one of the things, educating them about how to get back into their body. We call them grounding techniques. So we teach them how to ground themselves. And one of the first things I say is you actually first really touch the ground. I'll have them pick up their foot and actually feel their foot touch the ground, so that you're literally grounding yourself, and then paying attention to what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? So that you get yourself back in the present and out of that violence, whether it was emotional, sexual, physical, out of that violence that happened to you, get yourself back into the present moment.
And I want to add this real quick, because I think something that I have found a lot is sometimes people just need to be educated that something is trauma, or that it had the potential to be traumatic. Because I know that I've had so many times where somebody said, well, this person was doing this to me. And I'm internally going like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. And we do define it differently sometimes. And there are cultural contexts about how people sometimes set those parameters and things like that. But being willing to have an educational conversation where we can even dissect what some of that looks like, and the context of that, because a lot of times people who've experienced, they know their bodies are going through things and they don't really know totally why they're doing this or that. But sometimes you have to educate about the fact that something could have potentially even been trauma.
Yeah.
I would like to say a comment about that, if it's okay, Pamela. Permission to connect with your feelings. And I know it sounds odd, but I know you three, or possibly even Larissa, is familiar with this. I've had opportunities to discount what had happened, or what was happening. But sometimes just verbalizing that for someone like Jessica just said, so others can hear it. Somebody can say, oh my God, that
That's
equals
what that was.
you're being
Yeah.
traumatized. And I just wanted to add that sometimes, and I know it sounds weird, but that permission to say that hurt me, that concerned me, that bothered me.
And I think that's what we were talking about when we get, and so I want you to comment on that again, Beth, when we get to the part about giving them the opportunity to express their anger, or to express whatever else it was, or whatever else it is that they're experiencing. But the next question I want to say is that they need to be comforted. But I want us to talk about this. How do we comfort them without giving them permission to be a victim? Do you hear what I'm saying? Without giving them permission to constantly wallow in the past. So how do we comfort them without them developing a victim mentality? And I think Beth had a good idea with the scripture. But
related to how do we,
that it takes the word. I mean, you take them.
yeah. I mean, the comfort of the word is John 8:32, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. So facilitating the word of God as truth without sometimes sounding like I'm trying to save you. I am saved,
Right.
assuming that's the case. but facilitated in such a way that's comforting, that's loving, that's I'm able to identify with what you're saying, and to give me that peace and that, as you said, comfort, that whatever this thing happened to you isn't your identity, but your
Yeah.
identity is found in the truth of God's word.
Right.
Sometimes things happen that were outside of our controls, and sometimes we go into it eyes open.
Mhm.
Either way, what do you say? Is there still not an opportunity that is traumatic for me?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a traumatic experience.
Clinicians, how do we comfort without inadvertently facilitating a victim mentality?
I think there is a process at play here. So I don't think that the way you would comfort someone who is at the beginning of their trauma journey is maybe the same type that you would do as they go through the different steps and stages. So a lot of at the beginning is being with them,
Mm-hmm.
being
Be
safe,
present.
being
Yes.
present, and having a presence of hope, and allowing them to bring the darkness into the light. I think especially when it comes to sexual and spiritual trauma, there are so many layers of embedded darkness, confusion, and shame
Mm-hmm.
that to be present and to sit and allow them to have the space to take a pinky toe forward and then maybe withdraw as needed. Later on, after they've gone through a lot of it, if that shifts over to a victim mentality, at the beginning, it's usually not a victim mentality. At the beginning, it's
Right.
usually denial.
Right.
And at the beginning, a lot of times they need to realize that they were victimized. So, and sometimes it's comforting for it to be validated at the level to which the trauma
Just to
needs
say,
to be
yes, you were a
owned.
victim.
Yes. Something happened to you without your consent, and you should be hurt. You should be mad. Not should, I don't use those language, but you know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
this idea of like, yeah, that is a valid and appropriate response to the situation. Over a long period of time, the victim mentality doesn't tend to kick in until like later on, I think, when some of the process. So I think that it is that comforting at the beginning. It's really tricky because if you go, a lot of it is present and presence and listening to the Lord and asking them and getting their consent, because a lot of times that's been removed. So saying, allowing their nervous system to try things. Is it more comforting if you scooch your chair closer an inch, or if you move it back an inch? Is it more comforting if we angle our chairs away or angle our chairs toward? And these tiny little things where they get a little bit more power, a little more control, and a little bit more practice of attunement.
As you said, you have to be very discerning. You have to be very observant. And the statement about ensuring that they understand that no matter what, they weren't the victim. I think about the case study that we did, and I've heard preachers preach that, well, Tamar should not have gone into Amnon's chamber. Well, Tamar was sent into Amnon's chamber. It wasn't Tamar's fault that Amnon violated her, and Tamar needs to understand that. Tamar needs to understand that. Tamar needs to believe that we believe
Yes.
that she was violent.
And even as it exists today, it's often said, and I used to hear it years ago, because of the way a woman was dressed and her appearance, that she attracted, and that gave him permission to take advantage of her body. And I'm talking about, okay, so I'm not a counselor, so I'll say this. I think that is one of the most sick, that is just sick for that philosophy to go forward. And for anyone to speak something like that, because what you do is you really condone the behavior of the abuser, the attacker, and you discount and just, you add insult to injury, is what I say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I really agree with Christine that it's sort of a dance. The comfort is a comfort dance, because in the beginning, there's just such a need for validation of experience and validation that, and I really felt the word judgment, like that place of being judgment free, that no matter what the emotion is, no matter what the experience is, that I've got to be able to come up and show up to the table to say, I don't have judgment of your character or even judgment of your thoughts or judgment of the emotions that you have. I'm willing to sit here. And, but that we're going to hold those things accountable inside of their context. We always tell people, this isn't my fault, but it is my responsibility because it affects my life. This was not my fault, but I have a responsibility to these things.
I'm
Right.
accountable.
Yeah.
I am accountable. They also need help in expressing any anger that they have about the trauma, including anger toward the perpetrator.
Yes.
Talk about the appropriateness and the importance of anger with regard to trauma. Talk about the appropriateness and the importance.
I would say there's two things. I mean, anger is an emotion that's designed to let us know that there's something in our environment that is not okay, that it's harmful to us in some way. And so anger is an appropriate response to a harmful behavior. And the other side of that too is, I'm a big believer that grief is God's natural healing process. The consequence of sin is loss and death, and He gave us this process even inside of our emotions that helps us heal. But anger is one of the emotions of grief, and so it's having an appropriate response to this shouldn't happen. What I tell people is, if you're living in long-term resentment and bitterness, if you're living with hidden anger, that's when you start tiptoeing into those places that something could become out of order. But realistically, anger is our warning system. It says, this is harmful to me. And so, and a lot of times people that has been cut off, which is why even going forward after trauma, they become, they can get desensitized to being harmed, because that kind of gets shut down sometimes. And so part of it is actually helping that system activate so that their natural protection system is there, and it's expression of their process of grieving too. So,
the other part of that is sometimes, or not the other part of the question I had here was about, is it appropriate to confront the perpetrator? And the question is, maybe, maybe not, because you can be traumatized. And so when someone says to me that they're thinking about confronting the perpetrator, I just kind of walk through with them and so what is it that you think? How do you think it's going to help you heal? In what ways would this help you to heal? So that they understand that they might not be getting what they think they're getting, think they want to get when they confront the perpetrator. I see you nodding, Christine. Go ahead,
I have a
Beth.
question about that, Pamela. Help me. What about the closure that it could potentially bring from that encounter? From approaching, how does that work?
That's why you walk through it. What is it that you hope to gain? What is the personality of this individual? Is this individual prone to even hurt you even more?
Okay.
Right. So you have to weigh the balance of, is this actually going to give you closure, or is this going to deepen the wound?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd
I-
even
I-
add to that, sometimes confrontation is just a repeating of a trauma bond response.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I
no,
didn't
I
interrupt
thought you
you.
bursting.
No, well, I tell my people, like, God has multiple ways for restoration to happen. And sometimes restoration happens that God restores myself and to him and to those around me. But restoration does not always mean reconciliation. Right? Restoration can mean I can be restored within my heart. I may forgive that person, but no longer need to have any further relationship with that person. Reconciliation can mean that I've been restored to myself and that we reconcile with a set of new boundaries. And then there's restoration where we may be fully reconciled and we may do life together. So you really, it's one person at a time, and you have to use the judgment, what is the process? Because the truth is I may heal, but that person may not. And God may call me to love them from afar. And so it's an individual basis. You have to be present in it with that person and present across the board just to see, because God will make it known in its time. And sometimes we don't know,
And, and as I asked that to you, Pamela, and I love the comments, it popped in my head how that happened to me once after I asked a question and the individual lied, and the hurt, and I'm going to say it like that, the hurt that even confronting, and there were audience, and Pamela, the situation, but it just straight up lied. And I mean, I know people lie. I've lied before, but what I'm saying is, this traumatic thing, and you're sitting here and you're looking me face to face, dead in my eyes, and eyes locked to lock, and you sit there and you lie. Gosh, yeah. So I see, and how it can be repeated, like Christine said, all over again. Then I got to get out of this slump.
So we just have to be really, really particular about that. Wow. We have two last questions. We've already answered two of the ones as we were talking about it. One was about instruction in the grieving process, and Jessica talked about the need to grieve, and we instruct them in that. We've talked about that they need to know that they didn't deserve the hurt and that they didn't cause it. But the last two questions, and I want us to, we've got about 5 minutes. The last two that I want us to deal with, we already talked a little bit about forgiveness being the ultimate emotional and spirit triumph. But how do we help them understand that they can actually develop strengths out of healing from trauma? How do we help them understand that strength comes from healing from this trauma? And then after the clinicians take that away, Beth, take us on out.
Jessica's going to take us out today, Pamela.
Oh, okay.
So you really have a few more extra minutes today.
Okay.
Okay.
Christine. You're muted.
Okay. It usually comes, I think, after a lot of the healing's already happened. A lot of the good memories are buried. A lot of the good strengths are buried underneath suppressed anger, denied anger, misappropriation of responsibility. Everything gets clouded or cut off. I mean, not remembering chunks of a person's childhood is a real thing.
Yes.
And everything getting painted because of repressed anger is a real thing. So as those other steps that we talked about, right? The acknowledgement, owning responsibility, putting responsibility where it lies, appropriate anger, grieving, understanding what is going to be forgiveness with reconciliation, what's going to be forgiveness without reconciliation, and putting appropriate guardrails and boundaries in place where needed. When all of that safety is secured, then our strengths can rise.
Yes.
You know, flowers don't bloom in a hurricane, you know, and so once the hurricane's calmed and we've honored and acknowledged the devastation, and we've cleared the debris and we've rebuilt, and all of a sudden some of those old things can pop up, and so the beauty can come out, but not until there's safety. And all that other work has to be done first, for that safety to be in place so our garden can thrive. But then it comes up,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden we go, oh, there's beauty from the ashes. A phoenix does rise. God can use this in someone else's life. This pain has purpose. But until that point, and I think a lot of times we say, oh, we'll just forgive and move on. We truncate the whole thing. And so no healing really happens because we've just short-circuited the process. So it can be beautiful. Almost everybody who's a powerful minister has dealt with their trauma or is working on it, you know.
Yeah,
I-
that's my pain has purpose. And I actually have a retreat that I do called Beauty for Ashes. And it started out of my own healing story. Because once the healing happens, can recognize that your pain has purpose. Melissa, did you have a comment?
I
Or was
did.
that Jessica?
I
Yes.
think we
it's
both do, but go ahead,
I know,
Larissa. Go girl. Go girl.
I just this conversation is so powerful in regards to just again the part of acknowledging the trauma, recognizing the triggers that have come from our trauma, but the triumphant part. What I love is that, you know, God is able to take what the enemy meant for our harm, and he's able to turn it around for the good. And I think that's part of that empowerment for people to realize that, number one, I think Jessica mentioned this earlier, when we, you know, provide, you know, counseling and assistance to those who have experienced trauma, just one, acknowledging that we are in a broken world, right? This is a broken world. Things are going to happen that are outside of control. Painful things will happen as a result of we're living in a post-garden reality, a post-garden world. And so helping people realize that, yes, the things that happen to us are a result of the brokenness of the sin that, you know, we're living in this world, but also helping people realize that, you know, what happened, quote unquote, to us was really for us. And that God is able to, you know, undo some of the works of the enemy. And I love the point that, you know, Jessica mentioned earlier about the neural pathways, really looking at, you know, the trauma that happens in our lives. It kind of creates like a trench in your mind, you know, like a new pathway. And that's part of the work of the enemy, to keep you kind of stuck on repeat, right? Repeating the same trauma, repeating the same hurt. And so, you know, I have, you know, in years past, I've you know, worked with, you know, younger people, right, who have experienced crazy trauma that even adults have not experienced, and their brains are still developing, right? We're talking about people whose frontal cortex is not even yet developed, and they have experienced, you know, unfathomable trauma. But to help them to realize that what happened to you does not define who you are, and we serve a God who can undo what the enemy thought he did to try to destroy your life. So I just think this is such a powerful conversation to know that there is hope after trauma, that you don't have to stay stuck in what has happened, and that God can take your pain and truly make it into purpose.
And
Absolutely. Summarize and take us out.
And I'll say this, especially with the strengths, then even, and this kind of lends itself even to the forgiveness part too, but I'll piggyback because we're kind of in the same space, Larissa, because I do some education also on the spiritual side of what's happened to them, you know, that the enemy The enemy wants to distort our God-given identity, and our
That's
strengths
right.
are a part of that. And I tell them that from the beginning. And one of the things I tell the people that I work with when they're doing trauma resolution, because that's all I do right now is the trauma work, and is I'm here to be your partner, and I'm here to hold the hope of the triumph, and I'm here to hold the hope or the reality of your real identity that's
Yes.
underneath all these things. Because the truth is, those strengths existed before this ever happened. Now, some of them have grown, like they have exercised the muscle of that strength in the survival of what happened to them. And those are conversations you have to have throughout is, where did a survival response turn into something not so healthy, or where did it actually serve us and become an exercising of our strength. But I would say it's something I kind of build some of the educational language around even in the process, and let them know, just so that it starts to hit there, like, wow, you had such endurance, or wow, there was such a kindness in you, and wow, the enemy really used that to try to steal that kindness and really alter that perspective. And so I say I also build the conversation of strengths even when they're not ready to fully receive it or hear it. And I tell them all the time, I'm the holder of those things, but I go ahead and speak the truth over them a lot through the
Yes.
process,
Yeah.
so that when they are finally in that place of healing and their brain finally can go, I'm ready to receive the truth. They come back all the time and said, I know you told me this all the time, or I know you said this and you were going to hold it till, but I can finally see it. Because I think that's a gift that we have, in being able to do that. So we are so thankful you guys joined us in this series. This has been
Our next series in July is applying the whole armor of God in
Yes.
the workplace.
Yes. So transitioning to the armor of God,
Yeah.
the preventative care, right?
Yes.
We're going to prevention next month. So we just want to thank you guys for joining us. This has been a tough topic month, and we appreciate just being willing to step into the dialogue with us, and being willing to let the Lord search your heart and your mind and your life experience. And like we've said the last few weeks, if God has been stirring, if there's things that you've been experiencing, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're not connected to your own counselor, coach, or minister that you're walking that out with already, we just want to add that caveat in there. But today was a message of good news that God really does have community. He has processes. He has, in his design and the things he's allowed us as humans to come along and learn and study, and just the gift of community, that God has gifted the community to help us heal and be a part of that, and that there really is hope for triumph on the other side of trauma. Jesus is the pinnacle of that. Jesus was the ultimate triumph over the initial, traumatic events that occurred in the word. And so, thank you for joining us. Next week, we will have, give me a second. Beth sent me lots of messages. So, Susan is coming. I think it's Albright. For Wellness Wednesday, we'll be off next week. The panel's off, and so Susan Richardson, and she's going to be talking about a God-centered approach to wellness in our communities. So that's fantastic. We won't be here next week, but she'll be joining Beth next week to talk about that. We have GGG coming up. We've got 2 more months. We're 2 months out from that, so we want to invite you guys to get registered. It's a great event for women to get connected and just love on each other while we're growing together. And so invite you to that. And next week, Agata Demand is talking about going higher in your awareness for greater impact with Take Charge Tuesday. So we just invite you to join us in all the things that we're here to offer you guys as in our community. You guys have a great day. Okay.
You. Bye-bye.